Our first step is to really define that orbit of the eye. So I'm going to use a mask. And a mask pin is sufficient. Control click to invert, make sure it's all cleaned up. I'm going to pull in slightly so I'm not getting all of that bottom. I'm not getting all of that top. Okay. Control click, sorry, keep that inverted. Come into move, and there's a natural positioning based on how well the front plane of your face is. There's a natural positioning for the orbit of that eye that in this case I'm going to stick with. Now if yours is not set like this, then we want to have a sense of how far this really should go back. And of course, again, this is something that varies. So you'll want to take everything with a grain of salt. But we're looking at, let's just go to 1 unit. And line that up with the front. So remember, these units, because the transpose line is staying the same, these units are still kind of holding up to that 1/8 of the width. And so this is 1/8 of the width backwards. We're just keeping this. I don't really want to go in and adjust the transpose line to be uber precise about something. I just need really quick mental notes. Push the orbit of the eye 1/8 of that width backwards. Transpose line is already set for it. I don't have to sweat anything. This is going to work just fine. And then we'll pull the cheek, from there. But let's first get this established. So I'm going to pull out with move, just pull in. Let's turn perspective on. Get rid of that floor. Clear the mask. And we're doing pretty good. In order to really get that eye backwards though, let's really push it in. You'll decide how far back you want to go. I don't need to go too far at the moment, but just far enough. Okay. Control click to clear the mask. And then let's just make sure that this is lined up and looking pretty. So I'm just going to make this a little bit more of a curve. Then we're going to come in and establish the bridge of the nose here. We're not going to put the nose in, we don't need to. But we do need to get the muzzle of the maxilla, the little cylinder that happens in there. Okay. Bridge of the nose. Check your 3/4 every now and then. Make sure nothing got destroyed. Okay. Pull the muzzle of the mouth out slightly. And give that chin its separate plane. Okay, I'm having a little trouble right there. I just want to get that in. Okay. And let's talk about this profile and exactly what I'm going for here. We need a down plane, up plane. We need a little round plane here. Then we need an up plane, down, up, straight or down, then out from there. And kind of backwards. Those planes are consistent. They're part of the skull. That's just the way it is. So you want to make sure that the teeth are essentially pulling out. And roughly right around where the line of the teeth are going to be, not the lips, but the teeth. So there's going to be a little bit more, they're going to be a little lower than I have them right now. Make sure that the orbit of the eye, fairly straightforward in terms of how far back it is. And then this bridge of the nose here, this is going to vary. Some people don't even have a bridge. The nose just starts straight from there. But we're going to put it in. Okay, make sure that that's a high point, and I'm going to use trim dynamic to just enforce that. Trim dynamic has RGB off right now, so it's not screwing up my poly painting. But if it does start to screw up your poly painting, just turn it off. I'm also doing something that you'll see me do a lot more of, but I just established a bit of a plane change here with the nasal bone. This is one of the least understood parts of the face, is what happens here at the nose and where the face, the cheek connects with it. So we're going to spend some time adjusting that in due time. But first, let's move on to our next bit, which is to define the cheekbone a little bit more. And to define the cheekbone a little bit more, our job is really more to separate it from the mandible. So at this point, we need to start thinking about the cheek, or really as the thinking about the skull, as two separate pieces. One piece is the cranial section, the brow and the cheek, and see the maxilla with the teeth, nasal ridge, all of that stuff, and zygomatic bone, mastoid process. That's one part. The other part is the mandible, the jaw. So this next part is a separate piece, and I'm not going to separate it just yet because I want them to be seen in relationship to each other, but I do need to establish some ground rules for them. So I'm going to take a mask. Let's make sure perspective is off for this. Take a mask across where that cheek should be, straight across. Remember, the cheek is lining up with the bottom of that jaw there. The bottom of the nose, sorry. And then I'm going to make a couple of adjustments to it because the cheek is going to adjust its curve slightly. We're going to have cheekbone here. This is going to be the bottom part of it. And then that bottom part is going to curve upwards and towards the ear. So the simplified curve is about like that, going right in slightly above the ear hole. If you wanted to get a little bit more complex, there's a couple of more curves to it. And then we come in from there. But for right now, let's keep it really simple and just adjust it a little bit later. So I need to unpaint that portion. Control-Alt. And we need to pull the jaw in because the jaw is going to sit inside of the cheek. More like that. So we just need to make sure we push that in. I'm getting a bonus here. I'm also pushing in the temporal. So what shape are you supposed to make here? This is really important. And if we do this right, it just makes life really easy for us to progress. So you don't want to skip this step. You don't want to move ahead. Make a note of the exact shape that I'm making right now. From a bottom view, in the simplest format, we're making the wedge. Okay, now a little bit more complex. It actually bows out a little bit. Get a bit more of a horseshoe. But what I want you to do is just keep this as clean as possible. Make a wedge. If you look at this slightly from a 3/4 with perspective on, the wedge that we're creating very clearly delineated. Nice round form here, but definitely with a wedge quality. The defining points are the canines, as I mentioned to you before. That's where the muzzle of the mouth turns its directions. The jaw, the angle of the jaw, or the ramus as they call it. The bottom of the mandible. These are our important lines to keep intact. We are leaving the cheekbone up here completely intact. We're not adjusting it at all, and that quite naturally sets us up for some really good and very simple sculpting. So we're going to keep that and not mess with that in any real major way. All right. Clear our mask. We're already starting to get the sense of a skull out of this. Turn poly painting off. Ooh, change that color. And voila. Now, one thing that we need to do now, this is again regarding the cheek, is just make sure that the frontocephaloidal process of the zygomatic, love that. Basically, you want this little T form. This is all part of the cheek here. The T form that comes up, it connects to your brow, forms that overhang that we've talked about. And then we've dropped down with this column that if you tap right on the outside of your eye, you're hitting bone. Not in your eye, that hurts. Tap right on the outside of your eye, you're hitting this bone right here. And if you tap downwards, you can follow that until it disappears into your cheek. So you just tap, 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 and then it disappears in all of that cheek fat right there. That line that we have here, this column, is what we want to define next. And that means that we're pulling a couple of profiles in so that we can get some form pulling inwards. We're going to mask out using mask rectangle those forms right now. It's as simple as that. Make sure perspective is off though, otherwise the mask gets all wonky. You just want to eyeball this. It's not a lot of thickness. I wouldn't sweat it too much, but this is a pretty good unit of measurement. Invert that mask, move brush, press Alt. Push it in. I'm going to make sure this mask is fixed from my front. And do that again. All right. Shape of the skull starting to become a little bit more specific, and that's good. We now have the cheekbone fairly well defined. If you want, come in and clean up some of this form. It's good to press Alt to build up as well, because we have actually, in this case, I've trimmed this quite a bit, so I don't want to go too much more internal. I don't want to cut too much more. And all I'm trying to do is just a nice plane from the jaw from the ramus, bottom of the jaw, and the canine. Check your poly painting. Okay, not doing too shabby. So as I said, the next step for us now, we need to get in and define some of the complexity of the upper brow, frontal eminence, and get a clear sense of how this is behaving.